I'm Somanath. I'm the Chancellor of Chanakya University, the former chairman of ISRO. Today with me is Jayraj Nair, the CTO of Asia Pacific of Ansys by Synopsys. So welcome to the talk show that we are going to have now. It's very interesting to have you in an academic institution today at Chanakya University at Bangalore, specifically talking about a very interesting domain, which is education. Especially I also from the academic and research now domain, that research domain in space, I moved over to another domain of academic work, being the Chancellor of Chanakya University and also working with other academic institutions. It's interesting to know how Mr. Jayraj Nair, especially working with industry, and how that work that's done in industry can be connected to the academic research, and how do you really create a synergy between these two, especially the domain of electronics, chips, modeling, analytics, high-end research, and how it can benefit India. And this is an interesting topic, I think, that we can now discuss and debate.
Thank you so much for having me. I think it's always a pleasure to hang around with you. And more importantly, first time to come to Chanakya University. You have a beautiful campus here. A lot of interesting students, academic areas to focus on. Since the last time I met you during Space 2025, I think India is truly transforming. There's a lot of opportunity for us in the academic world in terms of building the next generation of engineers. So I think that's an area where I wanted to understand from you in terms of how, applied engineering, multidisciplinary engineering, all the concurrent engineering that is done today in advanced technology. How can we bring that to India? How can we build engineers that are very well situated to apply these techniques?
So I think there are 300 and odd universities in India today, private, public, and all of that. And you also compare with universities in the West. I think you would have seen universities, especially in the US and other nations. Now, can you just compare and look at some of the great universities in the world? The service universities here in India. Some of the universities are 100 years plus. Some are just new, like Chanakya. Some of the universities really have a problem of history, which actually weigh on them to change or modify with the changing times.
Yeah.
So with regard to a new university that is being built, look at the way in which that a university should evolve, or rather adopt to the changing times, especially the domain of technology and knowledge, which is dramatically changing in the way we produce knowledge, can create people with knowledge and also transmit knowledge into the students. What are your opinion?
If I look at, so I did 2 graduate studies in the US, so I've gone through the system as a student, and I've also taught in many of these institutions. I think one of the good opportunity here is that we have a greener slate, right? A green field, new canvas to
starting afresh.
Just starting afresh. It has its advantages. So you can leapfrog through all the discrepancies and issues that people had to go through over the years. I think in terms of learning itself, right? Connecting it's very difficult and time consuming to build good partnership between academia and industry. And so if that itself becomes the North Star earlier on for an institution like Chanakya, then it goes a long ways, because most of the IP generated in India, which is substantial, sometimes ends up mostly in the academic library versus in the startup ecosystem. So somehow the entrepreneurial landscape of converting these ideas into go-to-market motions and bringing out new products and services into the market, that is something that entrepreneurially Chanakya can accelerate. There's many things we can do. I think one of which is basically getting the academic world to get more applied, more hands-on, more sensitized to the financial surrounding, building a product, setting a margin, selling a product, getting it diffused to the larger customer base, finding markets within and outside of India. I mean, the world is our market.
But let us look at some of the statistics, some data. Say, we have been believing that universities are meant to create knowledge and also bring up the next generation of people.
Yeah.
That's what universities are meant to be. Today, the universities take a different role, in terms of, you talk about product making, going to market, business. You started talking all of this. Right. So in that context, let me look at publications. Publications has been the hallmark of academic excellence, ranking, and all of that. If you look at India as a nation which is publishing in peer-reviewed journals, the stature of India today is at the third place. The first is US, second is China, and third comes India. But if you look at the number of papers that are published, India is still far below the second position. So the number of papers published are still good, but it is not high as much on these two nations. Second part is about IP creation, about the patents that are filed. How much of the patents are getting converted into businesses or value economic into products? This percentage is hardly less than 10%.
It's very low, yeah.
Very low. So these two measures, if you compare with other nations, we are still lacking. But academic excellence is still measured in terms of publications. For example, a faculty to be recognized as a great faculty, you need to show peer-reviewed journal publications.
Yeah.
So when the pressure of building products and services and commercializing a few of the patents which will have high impact versus number of publications which are large in numbers, the measures or the calibration of the quality of a faculty differs. Now, with the changing times, this is going to be a huge issue for universities to be stature of the university. So how do you really accept this change in the ecosystem?
It's leaders like you who can set the right level of KPI for the academic teachers here in terms of not the volume, but instead of the volume KPI as a number of peer-reviewed publications, it could be a combination. I'm just asserting the fact that as leaders, we all get to change the system, which includes the measurement system that is an influencing vector to how people behave, how systems behave. And that's the advantage. I think here, society upliftment, getting innovation, moving the country forward is the agenda. And that
it requires some significant outlook change of the academic setup.
Yeah.
So a great professor should be regarded by the number of companies he creates, not by the number of publications that he made. No, possibly.
Absolutely. In fact, it's just one of the metrics. Right? It's not everything is quantifiable, but some are subjective ways of measuring success. But I was just having lunch with Deepak and team at Catamaran, and the discussion came up there about from academia to library versus academia to startup in terms of IP creation. But then the other conversation was an example of IIT Madras in terms of the accelerator that they have set up and how it is all industry-led and it's frankly hands-on applied, separate from the academic world in terms of the KPIs and success metrics, but operationally meant to enhance IIT Madras's capabilities with respect to real products. So that accelerator.
By the way, I tell you the park, the academic tech
yes,
park
exactly.
IIT Madras is now valued at around 55,000 crores.
Yes.
And the last year they would have produced a consultancy outcome is something like around 3,000 crores worth of work they have done in terms of consultancy work.
Yeah.
So in terms of money they can harness because of the work they do is significant compared to any other institution in this country. So it's a great thing to do.
That example came up today in the conversation saying, like, this is what they're doing. Why can't we replicate? True. Especially when you have one example of success, you can kind of emulate and repeat. Yeah, please.
Okay. So one of the point is, of course, this. But then for a university which is now coming up fresh, we still have the challenge of teaching people, because they come from certain background, they come to a domain and we need to educate them.
Right.
Now, this educational part of it is also changing substantially. So earlier we used to go to class, a teacher will come and give a lecture. We do to have an evaluation, assignment, etc. Now, you know that technology is enabling us to learn things much faster. You don't really need a teacher to teach you the way you used to teach. So an eligible student can have an ability to learn anything from anywhere. So today the being a remote place doesn't stop you from learning anything. So that means the way in which teaching happens in university, instruction happens in university also need to change with the times.
Right.
So, for example, in that context, how do you recommend that whether we need to have professors of earlier times or a virtual professor will do?
Yeah, the virtual professor is a kind of little stretched notion for the very reason that there is a persona and a mentorship relationship between a student and a teacher, right? And most often, it's many a times you would reflect on, hey, I learned this fundamental technology and capability from this gentleman. and it's a lifelong relationship. I think that aspect of it in Guru Sishya Parampara is something that we can instill and appreciate and admire and keep going, right?
By the way, I want to tell you that I also started delivering a course at Indian Institute of Science. The topic is on system engineering of launch vehicles.
Oh, super.
So I told my students, they just started, and I told them I'm no longer going to be a teacher like the way you have seen teachers. I will give you subjects that I'm going to teach next class today, topics, and you need to prepare and come back and ask me clarifications.
Of course.
I'm here to mentor you to understand it deeper if you want to do, and I'm not going to teach you any of that.
So the consumption model of, spoon feeding and the approach of traditionally laying out the curriculum and then just delivering it,
yes,
that model is changing for sure, because as you said,
syllabus, for example, I think there is no need to have, very closed syllabus structure.
This reminds me of a conversation I had with my freshman kid about the different rockets. We were talking about the MLK, the third module. Compared that with the Kari and the JAXA model rockets, I was just tell me more about these comparative analysis of the structures of these three rockets. I just asked a general question. All it took him was 5-6 minutes of reading through specs published by all these three different space agencies to come back with the analysis. And then he could put, Dad, the solid boosters are relevant in this type of launch and payload of this kind. I mean, those were the kind of curious insights that one could cultivate from the general information available. So that access to the information is one aspect of it, but the professor needs to nurture the student to
be creative and innovative. That's a different thing, of course.
Yes, that
comes out not from information alone. It needs from further churning on it.
Coaching, guiding, mentoring, of course. So that is a big change. I think the notion of having content being delivered in a very structured and year after year after year, right? And actually that has been one of the holdbacks of our system. In many instances, once something is set, it's like, okay, it is set for life. Right?
For example, professors used to bring the same notes for delivering in the class for 10 years in a row. No change in the same notes.
Textbooks don't change in the sense like you're tied and tethered to a certain variance of a textbook. Maximum, the edition may change with some changes to it. So those are limiters.
But then very important point which I want to bring in at this moment is about interdisciplinarity of subjects.
Yeah.
For example, we used to believe that physics is one topic. Chemistry is another topic. Biology is the third topic. Mathematics has no connection to any of this. It is another topic. Now we understand there is no way we can differentiate subject from one from the other. They are all interconnected. In nowhere in our curricula, in our school education or in higher education, this interconnection has been brought to light by great teachers. I think the time has come, if you are to really make any great discovery, break understanding, only people who transcend disciplines and understand across connections will be able to do. That's what great scientists did.
Yeah.
I think, how do you really create that sort of education in higher institutions of learning where you do not compartmentalize knowledge, where you actually look at the problem of the in front of you to solve through any of these routes?
Right. Foundational skills are essential, right? So those fundamentals have cut across all these different domains. I was at VLSID conference in Pune this week, and earlier in the week, the same conversation came up about, electrical engineer doing design work and looking at the electrical performance, which relates to thermal related issues and mechanical stress and warpage. So some domain experience in mechanical coefficients of thermal expansion and those kinds of things is also needed. So for an engineer to be successful in designing and solving a multi-physics problem, you have to have the expertise to a certain degree of all these domains. So that actually the willingness to learn and the desire to learn and not compartmentalize yourself as one is very essential. And I think it has to come tops down from the institutional level, that such behavior of operating at multiple discipline, multiple domains is rewarded in many ways.
So we used to say students, and I think great researchers should be like T. You say T is, you know the English alphabet T, where it has a vertical element and as well as a horizontal thing. The vertical part shows that you have a deep knowledge of one discipline.
Right.
And the horizontal shows that you have a wide knowledge of large number of disciplines, but not deep enough. But they are all interconnected in a manner to make the T complete and perfect. So I think the way the future will be the T-type students. of course, the type faculty that will really solve the real life problems. Now, let us connect to the work that you do in Ansys and the education sector, because Ansys also does the same thing. I think you have also moved away over a period from looking at problem solving in compartment solutions through solutions that have been brought to how to interconnect all of them to solve real problems. Real problems requires structural, thermal, analytical, modeling, and free flow of data across it. I think, how do you look at from your work in Ansys, so this multi-domain behavior?
That is the challenge, right? Doesn't the approach to solving these multi-physics and multi-domain challenges doesn't really exist in the academic world. So most often we work with institutional leaders, professors, create the necessary curriculum and content and get them to diffuse it to their students. And then they apply it in practicals and labs and settings where they try out the experiments, the hackathons, the different programs of competitive nature. So they actually get to apply and practice it. But we have to take a very concerted effort into building that kind. And the more and more the faculty realizes the value proposition of such kind of content, then it becomes easier for us. But again, it started bachelor's level, master's level, PhD level. Now we have to transcend that into the fundamental high school level.
True. But then universities, when you talk about universities, why there is a university? You can have a college and you talk about a university. University is a little higher than a college. The universities, I have heard that it is meant to solve the problems of the locality where it is situated. For example, if this university is here in Bangalore, it is meant to generate knowledge to solve the problems of what it influences. So you always say that universities are meant to identify problems and prepare students in the university to tackle the problem. So I believe the education today teaches you solutions to problems which are well known earlier.
Yeah.
So that's how every textbook talks about. You define a problem, you have a method to solve them. It's a well known thing. But then I believe that education should be to identify problem. So that you can develop methods to solve them at a, maybe it is immediately visible, immediately not visible. These problems are of various nature. For example, it could be a problem of education of the society, problem of health, which is not yet evident. COVID was a problem. That's all on a sudden came. How do you tackle that? Problem of agriculture, problem of drought, problem of energy, problem of green. So how do you teach students to identify problem and that is frame problems properly, not frame solutions?
Exactly. We always used to say in our classroom settings and in meetings is that, this kid asked the best questions, right? So it's not like he's got the best answers. It's often the kid who floats above all the norms and comes up with this googly or curveball and says, hey, look, why are we doing this like this? Right? That kind of discovery-led or enthusiasm or curiosity-led questioning, that is not, our system doesn't really encourage that from the exam-based culture that we have traditionally had, right? Somehow transcending that model and then getting to becoming that curious George kind of character.
I myself experienced it while I was a student in so-called great institutions. Even there, they don't encourage people to ask questions. When you ask questions in the class, the professor become unhappy because his class that is to be delivered on that day get disturbed because there is a question which is not in the syllabus. So this becomes a big problem for many teachers. I think, how do you really encourage? Questioning asks the fundamental nature of the learning process, not really answers. If you can ask the right question, you are a better student than you are able to give a better answer. I think you should agree with that, I believe.
Of course.
One of the similar challenge is in terms of comment from industry. I think we talked about industry and academic connect. I think we will discuss that a little later. But then one of the comment from industry is that the students are not equipped enough to come to industry and work after they come out of education.
Mm-hmm.
So is it really true, or is it some truth in it?
So I think it is somewhat true, but again, it's not his or her or institution's problem or the academic world's problem. It's a mutual situation that has percolated over time. In terms of what is the expectations, like I'll give you an example. When I started work at Infosys in 1990, I went through all this selection process, and then I am in this banking software development team. I had never written a skeleton program that could cut across and be a universal kind of a solution before. So when I walked into that situation, I did so many computer engineering classes and textbooks and data sets and algorithms. I could never map myself to something a practitioner like Sharad Hegde or Anu Hegde, who has built solutions that scale in the industry, have experienced in their lifetime. So my learning started from that point. So while I had the basic skills, I still did not have those kinds of applied skills. So the first year and a half was about, breaking in the engineering, trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work effectively. So that is expected. Some people do faster. Some institutions do very well because they have systems and processes in places to kind of orient and fast track the kids in a specific way of working. So I think it is a mutual alignment that needs to be done.
Saying that you don't really expect industry-ready students to come out of university. Rather, the industry can make them ready over a time. And if you can reduce the time short, and if the students are capable of handling it in shorter time, that is better.
They can be proactive too.
Right,
you can reach out to the students in the institution, and that's what we are trying to do. And with respect to Ansys technologies, Synopsys technologies, we reach out, we give them the tool sets and the capability and say, hey, this is how you do magic.
So they are ready while they are learning itself in the colleges, they are ready to be industry ready. With respect to tool handling, but not always problem handling. I think that is a different issue.
That is a bigger, those problems, because nobody today, very few institutions have the wherewithal to give the students the problem statements or to actually enable them to create problem statements for themselves. If for example, as you said, you're teaching systems thinking at ISC and you're doing it in the context of rockets and launch vehicles, in that case, the problems that you have seen over your career is an incredible wealth of wisdom and knowledge that you're giving to this student body that they can look at and learn from. And so when they walk into the next ISRO building, they are already equipped with ideas on what to face and how to solve them.
One of the challenge in this type of scenario is your ability to handle fundamentals and applied. We speak about fundamentals. Say, I know this guy, his fundas are strong. I know this guy, he knows how to use tools better.
Right.
Okay, a funda guy is not still competent enough to handle tools.
Right.
So there are two classes of people now who does not have fundamental, but he handles tools very well.
Right.
So where do you place students, researchers in this class? So which is going to be really long-term beneficial, whether the strength in the tools or strength in the fundamentals?
So applied capabilities, the ability to apply funda to real-world problems is super important. Otherwise, fundas are fundas, right? They'll stay with you. You can win hearts and you can score points.
You can also get Nobel Prize.
It can get Nobel Prize.
But then how do you really make money out of it?
Money not being the only destination, but money also product.
Business, product, everything. So, money comes out of all of this.
Of course. So that funda to application, that connection needs to be more robust. To do that, I think institutions can help build that muscle.
Cool.
The muscle by giving the KPI, the right KPI to influence behavior, to do practical things rather than just be an academician.
See, industry looks at academic institutions to support them to solve problems. That's why they are investing. In the West, if you see, industries give money for R&D only because the output of the R&D feeds into the industry in some way to make a better product or bring a better product which is better than somebody else's, or bring brand totally new solutions in front of you. Possibly industry have their capacity to do themselves, but they lack some critical knowledge which academics will refill, so that maybe in materials, maybe in processing, maybe in algorithm. So industry don't fund for fundamentals. Okay, but if I challenge this question in a manner, for example, you look at the discovery of LED. And the white LED never came. It came out of an individual's passion over years. I think that he got Nobel Prize. Over years to find out how a white color LED can be made by the mixture of LEDs. So it changed the entire display technology. Today, mobile phones, laptops, LED screens all came out of that one discovery of finding mixture of colors to find white color out of LEDs. So it didn't come from an academic research. It didn't come from an industrial research. It came from an individual's passion. Now, how do you really identify people with great passion and bring it to support research? I think finally comes out of in individuals, no?
Yeah, and frankly, the barrier for such individuals to exhibit and to actionize their passion is much lower today compared to how it used to be. I mean, today, if you really want to write up a hypothesis and to simulate and to test an idea and then to produce some results, the set of technologies, the set of infrastructure that you need is really available. So the ecosystem in general has become easier. But again, motivation, mentorship, the guidance, the leadership to not hold back, to take it on and do something with it, right?
Great. I think we have a good dialogue going on. I think in the meantime, let us take a little break and then look at some other domain a little deeper. One of them is specifically on emerging technologies and emerging new areas that are there hitting everywhere, and how technology sectors and industry look at it, and how academic institutions should look at new emerging areas very seriously so that you prepare new generation for the changing world.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Shri Jayraj Nair, let's come back to another area which is very interesting, because the technology which I say everywhere in academics, industry, is also fast changing. Let us look at the influx of AI in the midst of every sector, which is changing the way education is looking at it. It's also changing the way scientific discoveries are accelerated by the tools provided by AI. We can see computational capabilities enhanced tremendously. That's why AI also happened, that the computational chips or whatever processing capability dramatically increased, which also gave way to significant changes in the domains like chemistry. The chemistry has become computational today. Computational chemistry, synthesis of chemicals, molecules, happen in chemistry, in laboratory, in computers, not in test tubes. You also see same thing happening in biology. Biology, where higher molecules, medicines, drug trials are happening in computational domain, not really in the real domain. So the path to discovery is accelerated. Now, this is happening only in research lab. It doesn't happen in academic institutions. It doesn't happen in teaching. Now, how do you really bring the changing nature of technology to schools? Of course, AI is there everywhere. ChatGPT is in every classroom. So that is creating havoc in education. So let us start from there. How AI can actually help in bettering education?
I mean, from an education perspective, again, as you said, multiple sources of information, high volume information, synthesizing and leveraging insights and understanding and dealing with nuggets of insights vis-a-vis high volume data and information. That's an area clearly where AI can supplement the way education is prepared and delivered and consumed. In addition, as an example, today in our own products, we have the Copilot, engineering Copilot, which is basically an assistant that works with you to make natural language interface, the ability to ask questions, the ability to get correct, insightful answers, and then collaborate with the tool easily while you're working with the tool. So those kinds of capabilities, ChatGPT and large language models have enabled. But beyond that, getting more and more into these foundational models, physics-based large foundational models, different ways of using training data, different ways of predicting using good training data, all of those avenues are forthcoming. In terms of education, I think in fact, I have high school kids who are using ChatGPT and who are using these services to enhance their learning process. But there's a substantial difference in terms of enhancing versus just using these ChatGPT services to provide answers. So enhancement, insightful analytics, useful nuggets of intelligence, that deriving that is a process where the mentor, teacher, tutor has to orient the kids. So using AI in the appropriate way, ethical AI in the appropriate way for children to learn is a very important aspect.
No, I can tell you some examples, especially in the domain of AI. I think it is helping researchers.
Of course.
For example, when we were students of research, we used to spend a lot of time in literature survey. For example, it used to run for years together, collecting papers, reading, going through, underlining each part of it, making notes about it. Finally, making synthesis of where is the latest of the literature, and then find why research topics are existing. Identifying a research area itself was years of work. Today, it is no longer. Because you collect 1,000 papers, ask the system, large language models to analyze and find out gap areas. At least you can now, your path to identifying that domain can be much, much faster.
Of course.
So, in fact, we should look at like that, the research discoveries can be at least 100 times faster than in the past. Is it not?
Or more.
So, that itself is a tool which will enable us to do that. But then let us look at domains like computational domains. For example, medical synthesis, materials, high temperature materials, polymers, plastics, and biopolymers, using applied computation into biological systems like bacteria, etc., to be used to build new polymers. I think these domains are the latest of the research which is happening. Now, it becomes interesting, and equally interesting when you are looking at human biology, because research is more focused on longevity today.
Right.
How to improve health, how to look at genomics as a domain to look at human health, and then use genomics as a tool to understand large-scale disease, treatment, routines, processes, etc. as part of it. So now connect this to the academic world. And here again we see difficulties. No, we don't see this happening in academics, only in very high-end R&D labs this is happening. But this is the one which is changing the current tech ecosystem dramatically. So without understanding this, how young people can really get into finding problems to solve, because problems are being solved through other tools already.
Right. I think that's a changing landscape, right? As you said, longevity, I live in Japan and I see a lot of elder population. But when you look at the demographics and the amount of information available for that demographics, providing more personalized care by looking at the analytics for a certain category of age and sex and location-centric demographic population, that analysis is possible today. And frankly, the tools and technologies that are needed for that kind of desk research is not very unique to the industry. I cannot fathom a reason why it cannot transcend to the student community. Because, this is what open source is all about. This is what countries.
So we should make a greater pitch for industries to make it available to students faster.
Of course, of course. And frankly, access to information should never be the prerogative unless there is a significant amount of time and energy and IP proprietary to a particular.
I think IP could be sometimes a deterrent to helping next generation of people to come into the domain.
Of course. Again, open source is the way. And I think sometimes float all boats enhances the quality and standard of living for the whole world, not just a specific community.
True. I think we should also discuss equally another domain, because we talked about the advanced technologies that are coming in, longevity coming in, then genomics coming in. Equally critical are the understanding, not purely on technology. Human beings live in a complex environment where you have many other interplays. For example, people have to understand civic sense, for example, cleanliness, climate change issues, issues of geopolitics, language and culture. See, the education is not limited to technology alone.
Of course.
Education is a holistic development of human beings. No? And this requires education to be total. Then only you are in a position to understand problems. So, in terms of education framework, like a university like Chanakya, we believe that the education is not limited to engineering alone. The new educational policy of Government of India is also encompasses that idea that if you are to really create great people, leaders, then we need to have people to understand all of this.
Right.
Society must be understood. Technology also must be understood. And if you marry society with the technology, then only you are able to find where that you will apply that knowledge to solve problems of society. So how do you see a scientist, engineer must be also a great artist and a musician?
Look, creative, fundamental, academic, all of these. The feet is tough. Yeah. Okay. I'll start again. Okay, and keep it down. Okay. So if you look at, you said scientist, musician, I think there's a lot of synergy in different parts of the brain doing interesting things at the same time. But generally, I think this whole notion of work ethic, the context in which you're operating, social responsibility, these things are equally important, because if you look at how companies and countries succeed, I'll give you 2 examples. Recently, I was in Hokkaido for a conference, EDAPS conference, and I was talking to another colleague who has been working on a 2 nanometer process, trying to build a semiconductor chip. And the velocity and the execution efficacy of that organization is something I shared with you earlier. It is substantially better and faster and more effective, not because of technological gaps and advancements. It's just some of the work ethic and the ways of working and the contextual community-oriented development, concurrent engineering work that happened there, vis-a-vis other opportunities where somewhere in India here, it took a long time. So I think learning from others and then trying to perpetuate a kind of socially responsible yet technologically very fast-paced and focused, that requires a 360 perspective, as you mentioned. And I think ISRO is a classic example of one where, practice and execution and conceptual design and the goal setting and management by objective, all these things kind of come together in a beautiful way to deliver results.
No, if I look at it in a larger perspective, we always believe the Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam. The world is one and is for everyone.
Yes.
So when you, in that context, we believe in education. We believe that we need to develop holistic people. When we are sensitive to society, the technology is a double-edged sword. It has plus, it has capability to do harm as well.
Of course.
When you look at precisely on this issue of climate change and weather, today that the greenhouse gas emissions, the climate change issues are treated with contempt from somewhere, it is treated with great respect from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So sensitive to do research in this domain becomes important. How much of effort that you should put to research on greener technologies, how much of effort that you should work on domains like bringing emissions. I think this becomes important from that context.
Yeah, of course, not only at a country level, country-specific context that you can see emerging gaps across countries, but we all live in one beautiful planet. And that's the one planet we got, right? So I think mutually responsible collection or collective of countries need to play an effective role in it.
Finally, human beings are not morons. They love beauty. They love subtle aspects of life. For example, all of us love music.
Yes.
We like to see a beautiful picture, painting. Technology is applied to all of these places.
Yeah.
For example, today music is being digitized and stored and transmitted because of the power of technology today.
Of course.
Similarly, it's a case where the painting, the colors, the synthesis of colors, the mixing of colors, the textures, the beautiful artwork that are happening is happening in the digital world. Recently, I gave a talk on how cartooning and animation sector has been significantly influenced by the technology developments. Earlier, cartooning was only manual drawing, sketching.
Yeah.
Today, animation is such a dramatic industry in which that you can create animation with AI tools.
Yeah.
You can give them movements. After that, you can actually give them voiceover with emotions. You can simply say, give this much text in with a humor. It will give the humor tone into the language. So technology has changed in such a way that even artistic creations are influenced by technology. Mm-hmm. So why I say this is, if you are really don't create morons out of education, you have to create people with the great talents of multidisciplinary talent. I think education should cover wide spectrum of people, and you should actually bring in institutions also people of multiple talents. And it's not technology, it's not multidisciplinary. In science domains of disciplinarity, it should also encompass other forms
creative
of
art forms. Of course, of course. In fact, and as a great institution, Chanakya can set the tone and tenor in which these things kind of permeate. always I've seen institutions and individuals follow leaders, innovators in any of these areas where you're trying to introduce a new ways of working, trying to introduce new culture, new types of learnings. When you bring it and people start to feel it, experience it, and see the benefits of doing it the right way, then they follow. So it's great to see that kind of moment.
Let me move from this domain to another slightly different thing. I think we started with the universities, education, and we are continuing to discuss that domain longer. You would have seen universities of other worlds versus in Indian universities. There are top in universities. I think people talk about the Ivy League and place where things are happening. They produce Nobel laureates. They produce economic activities of significant magnitude. If you compare universities in India, we can't find that to happening. Although there are some universities figuring in 100 top university. I don't know who finds that 100 top, but still some figuring in there, and many are not there. My question today is, how do you create some of those universities you see in some other part of the world of that caliber? And what if you do, people will come there. We were having such universities thousands of years back in India. Nalanda, we are all there thriving, where people came from across the world to learn. That was the knowledge that was attracted so many people. It is no longer going to be the knowledge alone. Knowledge is now everywhere. Now what we need is culture. So what culture is missing in universities, or rather culture that you need to create here so as to create such universities in India?
I think university and academia and teaching is also something like an ecosystem play. I mean, it's not just an individual university initiative.
Can you say you need university cities?
University cities, yes, of course. I mean, the idea is it transcends borders. City is not limited to a city.
It's not just a boundary where the colleges are situated. It is where there is a connection between society, industry, university, all in one place.
It's like a larger ecosystem play. If in that ecosystem, I mean, there's no magic answer to it, but the conceptual notion here is that there are 3 or 4 major facets of education, right? It's the content and the curriculum, the mechanism to deliver the curriculum, the student body, and the general societal body that interfaces with it, which includes the startup and industry and ecosystem. That whole ecosystem, how do you build it? How do you effectively nurture it and encourage each other to collaborate more with each other, like from the industry perspective, from the academia perspective, from the government and content developer perspective? How do you build that? I don't think there is a classic role model. I went to an Institute of Higher Learning in the US. I was at MIT for a few years. I learned more actually from my peers in the SDM program when I was doing the system design and management program than from some of my instructors. Not that the instructors were not capable. I think they were steering me into doing more collaborative work with people who were working in Boeing versus Pratt & Whitney versus this and that, right? So the idea was to build that, you need sufficient muscle. And that sufficient muscle is a collection of talented interdisciplinary students, people coming from different parts, as you said, all over India and the world. Instructors also, I think you need to throw in a wrench that makes the noise, right? In the sense that you have to throw in something which is different than the traditional norm. If you have homogeneity in the way content is created and delivered, then that kind of slows down the process and everybody just takes that for granted. I think some degree of upheaval earlier on with experimentation, with hackathons, with learning, new ways of learning, that's very important. One more point I'd make is that I think the hunger to learn is a pervasive characteristic of students in Southeast Asia. It is very admirable and something that always needs to be nurtured and
it is true in many US universities also. You see the students that are coming for higher institutions are the second generation, third generation Southeast Asian people, who comes out of their parents settled there long back. So of course they have the drive to learn. And
it's an innate need. It's an innate need to learn, to get better at what you're doing, and to advance the society and the world.
But we want to create this in India.
Yes.
My problem is, how do you really create such universities in India? So we are in Bangalore today. We know Indian Institute of Science is a top university, research university in India. So we have one example here. but still it has to scale further. I want to create some more here. If you can Chanakya be one? This was one of the questions actually.
Absolutely. I think the tops down commitment to transforming the education system per se, and then, as I said, ways of educating, content with which to educate, build this ecosystem. I think it takes a dedicated sense of purpose and drive, which is the most important aspect. And nowadays, I also see a lot of government-related support system. There is willingness to listen, the willingness to change. I spent some time, as I told you earlier, with Katamaran and Mr. Murthy this morning, and we were talking about the inflection that happened in 1990 when the markets and the controls were changed. This is something like that. This generation, this decade is where change is more permeable and more possible.
For example, I will tell you this time now we are just after the national education policy has been announced.
Yeah.
And significant change in the higher institutions of learning has come by aggregating the various institutions in India like the UGC, the AICT are all been integrated into one regulator come enabler. Mm-hmm. So some reforms are happening here in terms of that type of aggregation in the administration of education, not really in the finally in the colleges. I think we need to look at it how these new policies are really going to help research-based education really enhancing. Of course, in terms of students' production, in terms of teaching, I think this is really going to grow. But if you really have to produce a research outcome connecting to industry, which has a economic outcome, and this chain is pipeline is still not fully done. One of the efforts I think I want to bring it to your notice is about the ANRF called Anusandhan National Research Foundation, which has been announced by Government of India, where the funding from the private institutions like industries and the public funded institutions and academia can be gathered to create new research laboratories. So government has provisioned something like 1.5 lakh crores worth of money for this activity, which has now a CEO who is actually trying to build, bring it out, things like that. But this is only one part of the effort. I think there is much more. Investment need to come from government in research funding. Let me also add some statistics. The overall investment by Government of India in R&D in research, especially in academic research and other research put together, is less than 1% of the GDP of the nation. So when you compare it with other nations like USA or China or other nations, it is much higher, maybe 2 to 3%. So I understand government has put a goal of at least to increase it to reach at least 1%. Because our GDP is also increasing. Of course. So absolute value of the money investment, it is increasing anyway. Right. But with regard to the GDP percentage, I think our R&D investment should go from 1%. And for me, if India has to really scale up to top position, it need to go to something like 2%. That's what I believe that in terms of absolute investment, it should go to some few lakh crores per year. I think that is very, very important because unless you create laboratories with some real good infrastructure to do the top-end research. For example, chip area, I think how many research labs are there for the core R&D? Not many. I think Indian Institute of Science has one and some other institutions have a few foundries. I think this is one area. Do you think any such efforts of this nature in terms of infrastructure creation will be necessary?
Absolutely. In fact, I spent some time during the same EDAP session in Hokkaido with Professor Madhavan Swaminathan. He runs a center called Chimes Center.
Okay.
So Chimes 1.0 is all about advanced packaging of semiconductor technology, and it's run in Penn State. So I was talking to him, said, okay, you got a big grant and now it's done. Your grants are usually time-bound by calendar years and all that. So what's next? So I said, yes, I'm talking to all the industry guys and we're all going to get together and define something called Chimes 2.0. It will have this purpose, this mission. So you can see the sense of passion and sense of direction on where he wants to take advanced packaging for the US industry. And that leads to more participation from the ecosystem and suddenly it becomes real. I think that is something where government definitely helps. In India, government is doing that. I think the Indian Semiconductor Mission, ISM, since 2021 has made a dramatic impact in the way it's perceived and is driven. But it also needs, at the same time, leadership from different parts of the supply chain, so-called, which is academia is one part of it, the industry component, the government also plays a very significant role. So getting all these players to do something magic together, I think that's the opportunity in front of all of us.
Now you look at India once again, I'll tell you, in every year we produce 1.5 lakh engineers.
Wow.
Okay, that's the number of engineers coming out of our institutions, which includes IITs, NITs, second and third tertiary level engineering colleges, graduates in different disciplines. But there is a IIT class, which we say the top class, but many of them don't even work for India government. But recent statistics show that at least 60% of them stay in India. Wow. Only 40% is going to other domains. Very good. But for whom this 60% is working, they are working for multinational companies who are now luckily having their centers of excellence or other places in India. So they are not really working for Indian economy, they are working for the global economy, working in India. It's a real good thing. But if you look at the top research laboratories or institutions, the contribution of IIT students into faculty positions, into Indian-based research work, India IP, Indian-owned IP generation, I think this is a case of serious concern because the nation is investing so much in those domains. I think this is one area we need to increase. But equally important is to increase in the NITs and secondary and tertiary level, which is actually contributing to the institutions. There the investment by the government of India is actually lower. So I think we must have a plan to significantly improve funding in those universities also, so as to enable research to happen. Here is where the Chanakya University model, once again I will tell you, it's a university of high caliber, funded by private, so that it is not a government funding. So maybe government should look at private institutions also. Possibly government can put some money in. Maybe I'm not using this forum to say government should put more money into Chanakya, but it is a good idea that very top performing private universities need to be funded and supported by government. Because other than government, there is no big money giver here. I think government's investment continue to remain as a top investment for every domain. Even when I was talking to some of the universities in US, much of the research funding in US universities still come from government. It is not coming from private.
Right.
For example, earlier it used to be DOD, which used to be the biggest funder of most of the R&D working happening in. Today it is from Ministry of Commerce. It comes from Ministry of Biology or what are the healthcare, NIH, and many such institutions fund. And this funding to continue from government. I think government moving out of research funding, significant quantity of the research funding should be the top priority of the government. I think for building a future nation, I think investment has to come from government and it has to be provisioned. I think there is no other way.
I think muscle building takes time and it needs the backing of government initiatives which are meant to serve the nation over a long period of time.
Okay, one more question, which is something which I will discuss and conclude this session, is primarily on the topic of building education from the basics, from the younger age. I think younger age, we have a culture. We being Indian, we have a rigorous learning process right from the younger age. We don't believe that students have to be playing till age of 6 and you go to school at the age of 6. I went to school or rather formal teaching at the age of 2. So I went to
KG1, KG2.
There is no KG in my younger days. We had a old lady in my neighbor. He used to come and teach me to write alphabets. 2.5 years, and possibly by the time when I reached age of 4, I know language, I know alphabets, I know mathematics, I know tables at the age of 4.
Right.
And today we say the new education, people say you need to wait till 6 years. So young age you should play very well so that you can learn. Sometimes I get confused. It may be the better study, I don't know. But this has helped Indians to be very rigorous in mathematics. It has the ability to learn faster and compete with people. Are we missing something here by talking models from West to be adopted in Indian context?
Not necessarily. I think what works in each country, each culture is a bit different. For example, I'm in Japan and we were talking about the same thing. You see little cute kids, they don't take any tests, they don't take any exams till they are a certain age, 6 or 5. It's more about learning how to organize your life, putting things in place, getting self-responsible, taking care of yourself, taking care of others around you. There's certain value proposition, that kind of learning. But that in itself may not be adequate in terms of the fundamentals of tables and language and sciences and basics that we expect. Or an artist trying to draw a colorful painting. My daughter, when she was 3 or 4, was drawing out some beautiful sketches, which we all appreciated, right? But again, the point is, there are ways in which we as in parents and we as in teachers can interpret the success of our own next generation. So one solution doesn't work for everyone. So I think the rigor in academics is fundus, right? Having good fundus in sciences, in arts, in creative sciences, in the way we interact and socially behave with other people, giving respect. An example is, we were talking about somebody just walked over from one house when I was driving to the other house and picked up the garbage in front of their house and cleaned up the sub-segment of the street versus just the domain in front of their house. This is in India, right? Yeah. Which exhibits a value system, a culture that we need to implement more broadly. So now that may be a learning for a 10-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old when they watch somebody do something nice like that, right?
So say civic culture.
A civic culture. So those, so learning comes in very many different shapes and forms, and no one cultural template fits another one. But India in particular has a storied history of learning from the Nalanda times, and it's something that we need to admire and appreciate.
We believe that memorizing is a great quality, and now the new learning says memorizing is not a great quality. Huh?
I don't think just today's trends are some things that can undermine the traditional wisdom of generations of the society. So what has established itself and templatized itself for success of societies for generations is something worth looking at. You cannot just get hooked on to something new from today, which is on TikTok or Instagram, and then transform your educational system overnight. Right?
Equally important is
some rigor is important.
Yeah. Equally in those type of learning process, equally important is our language skills.
Of course.
For example, in India, we have a cultural link and language links. We don't speak one language. We speak so many languages.
Yeah.
And this has been a great strength for the nation because it gives you, cutting across states, and though we are one nation, but we speak so many languages, even approved languages. And this languages has its own culture.
Yeah.
It has its own way of learning it. See, all of us learned the basics till school only in our language.
Of course.
Which is our mother tongue. Then later adopted English, which is also our language today. It's no longer a foreign language.
It is the business language.
It is also the language of the nation.
Of course.
Because we have more English-speaking people than Britain today in India. So that way it's our language. So the language plays an important role in the education because it provides you information. It also provides a basis on which your thought process works.
Yeah.
Because thinking works in a language. So it is now today's new education policy recognize the way our native language has an influence on your thinking process, and why we should cultivate language as an important tool for our ability to think.
Yes.
So I think this is also strength that we need to give to our generation.
Absolutely, and not just from a local domain, India-centric perspective, right? Interoperability is a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
If you go to any other part of the world and you want to communicate and exchange ideas and information, because we are all at the end of the day
it's no longer an issue. You use your mobile phone. You don't have to know Chinese to speak to a Chinese fellow. You can speak in English, Hindi to him. It will speak in Chinese to him.
Those are all supplemental tools. But I'm in Japan, and every time I speak to them with 1 or 2 words in Japanese on my own, without the assistance of translate. It makes cultural bonding so affirmative and so grateful for mutual benefit. So yes, language skills are super important. And I think I experience it every time I come to India, because every time Hindi, English, Tamil, Telugu, Marathi, in fact, in this last trip, Malayalam, of course, being my mother tongue, I've experienced all of that in some fashion or form. And it has only invigorated my intellectual capabilities in this week.
No, let us conclude saying that now our educational system is going through a significant reforms now. New universities, though numbers are increasing, I think the significance of some of the new universities cannot be, we cannot ignore. There is a possibility that we can create world-class university in India if the real building blocks are brought at the right place, which includes government support, industry funding, the ability to identify problems of the society and then find solutions out of it, having inspired leaders who can actually bring great students there, and a culture of learning which is Indian way of learning. I think we don't have to even adopt anything. I think this type of building blocks, if you put together, there is a great possibility. And Chanakya University, we have seen that the funding, especially the philanthropy, is really something. Building a university is really a good example. Now, I would like to let you know your closing thoughts on how seeing the world and working with the Ansys, you have seen how you have been helping education, skilling people, and how industry can bring a change in this sector, working and co-working with the academic. What are your closing thoughts?
I think my closing thoughts are very simple. I think the best way to learn is to teach. So for all my industry friends who are doing different magical things in the industry, step out of your comfort zones, come and educate. Take a goal to educate X number of students, be it graduate level, undergraduate level, or even high school students. Spread the wisdom.
Also give sponsorships.
Of course.
Internships.
Internships are actually the way to do applied learning and creating those opportunities from the industry. We do quite a significant chunk of it.
I also have one more suggestion to industry. Because you see PhDs.
Yes.
Now, you look at the entire universities, I think PhDs come out and they are not employable today. Because many of the higher education, you see graduates are more employable than PhDs. In the Indian context, I am telling. So one of the requests I have for industries in India is to fund PhDs.
Right.
Make them part of your journey.
Right.
At least you make sure at least 5 to 10 of the PhDs in different universities in this country are supported by you, and they are mandated to do problem solutions for that particular industry.
Right.
And their research should be focused on the industry so that they can really bring out solutions for the industry's problem and possibly become an employee of that to continue to solve that problem. I think PhDs need not be funded by state. They can be funded by industry.
In fact, domain-centric problem statements exist.
Yes.
And that needs deep rigor, deep analysis, deep research in that topic.
Yes.
And industry can definitely support that.
So with that, let us come to our closer of our discussion.
It's absolutely a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
It's absolutely a pleasure. Thank you.